Hi. So I've been trying to figure out a way to touch on this. I've been circling it. I'm going to be writing more about this later. For a little bit of background, I grew up on Fire Island. I held the hands of gay men as they died of AIDS. I come from the theater and the arts world. I am not a fag hag or a fruit fly. I am simply somebody who happened to be in a certain place at a certain time. And I remember. First of all, let me say this. How would I define a gay man from a queer man? A gay man loves other men. A queer man loves only himself. When I see Milo and Tucker talking, here's what I see. I see a conversation that we've seen appear in theater plays throughout history. I also see major wounds, a wound they probably very much share. See, let's remember, Milo got canceled, so to speak, by the right when it came to become known that he had had a mentorship that was intimate with an older gay man. This was conflated with pedophilia. This is a very old, very common thing. Look, Me Too opened up a huge way of weaponizing that which should never be adjudicated. Me Too wasn't about people who had real wounds. How do I know? Because I'm one. I was raped when I was 16 years old, and the pressure to talk about it was horrifying. It also cut a connection between myself and the person who had hurt me, and we were actually moving towards real forgiveness. True forgiveness. See, this is what people don't understand about the philosophy of perception called socialist realism. It functioned to reduce everyone into various pathologies. This is also where the erasure of Jews, Jewish women, Jewish artists, and I don't mean as we see it now, I'm talking about who survives. Also, who survives pandemics, socialist realist happenings, and also the press. Look, I was there on the ground when people were talking about gay marriage versus civil unions. The roots of these things had nothing to do with what's remembered now, any more than the civil rights movements or even women's equality did. What socialist realism does, whether it's in all of its theories, whether it's critical race theory, critical gender theory, critical AI theory, critical trauma theory, is that it flattens everything into a set of pathologies and categories. What's concerning me right now is that I'm seeing a world in which everything is looked at through a trauma landscape. This is textbook socialist realism, and it leads to the worst form of slavery imaginable. When we look at, for example, Fauci, right? And what happened there, and the way this system suddenly forgot everything that happened during HIV/AIDS, because again, who survived? Who's left? Look, no human being is perfect and without a flaw. But the work of great men and women that came before us that's been so flattened by critical theory critical thinking, critical. See, look, the role of a critic is to describe, not prescribe. That's the role of a critic. We have a bunch of lousy critics, all rooted in critical theory, everything is now the Hegelian dialectic. Thesis, antithesis, leading to synthesis. That's not the way life works. It's not the way love works. And also, let me make something plain here. Let's talk about two portions of the 5 books of Moses, which have been translated. They're not in the original biblical Hebrew by almost anyone. And even reading the original biblical Hebrew, most Jews don't even do that anymore. And this is not just coincidence. So you have to remember, during the times of our other exiles as Jews, and there's not that many of us, Jews were reading and praying in biblical Hebrew, but speaking Greek. Jews were reading biblical Hebrew and writing in Yiddish. Biblical Hebrew is a beautifully complex, complicated, also multifaceted, very multidimensional language. Every letter itself, every single letter of the alphabet has a world. So, for example, and this all relates, because what we're talking about here are people are trying to pathologize love, pathologize trauma, pathologize and put everyone into a category to say everything can be determined by a new form of a political witch hunt ritual. And this is a ritual. It's the same ritual that created the anti-vaxxers and the vaxxers. The same ritual that created the Me Too movement and the targets of it. Divided men and women. Suddenly reduced the, what had been created by actual heroes in movements that never wanted to be activists. That look at a landscape and they say, I see what I can do now. In Torah, we talk about, we have this commandment as Jews, it's Zachor, Amalek, remember what he did to you as you were coming out of Egypt. What that means, not just historically, but what it means is, as you're coming out of enslavement, of a world in which you are unable to be who you are, and even your own children are sacrificed for utility, treated as nothing. And that was the embitterness that happened when Hebrews wouldn't make the quota. They would shove a baby in there. And those cries, that is something, it's almost unnameable. Much like the unnameable elements we now go through with COVID, or the unnameable elements that happened with World War I. See, there's a truth that if you don't name something, it can happen again. So here come the role of artists, theater, stories, all throughout our history, and particularly part of our history, as the people simply chosen to have a memory for this, that remnant of this. Art and theater and storytelling isn't simply something that we all do as an extraneous thing. It's sacred. Zachor Amalek and what he did to you when you came out of Egypt. So this is not an individual. This is not Lashon Hara. This is not gossip. This is an archetype. And archetypes are not nothing. This is why when people would be educated, when people would go into liberal arts educations, or any higher universities, what's fascinating is that the very archetypes that might have been common sense to a person that was working in land with a family, more of the hunter-gatherer or more provincial, suddenly had to be reinstated and brought back in as part of what was becoming the Enlightenment. It's complicated. And what does this have to do with why are you gay? Well, if you guys all remember, some of you, I was very concerned about what queer theory was doing to Drag Queen Story Hour. And why? Well, this is part of why. A drag queen, drag as an art form, is part of what's known as clowning. Clowning doesn't mean lying. Clowning is the truth teller. Clowning is a way to tell a story in such a way that you can understand it through laughter and humor. Because when I say truth so full the lie cannot breathe, it's because it's laughter. When something is so ridiculous and so absurd and you start to laugh and there's truth. See, when I look at somebody like Milo, I remember the laughter, his ability to use laughter. And I remember the moment that something very private, very intimate, and very personal was used in a similar way to what was done to people like me with Me Too. Look, there's a long tradition of people, of gay men who are hyperbolic, cutting, fierce, flamboyant, playful, emotional, dark, a problem that can't be solved, mysterious. And this is not something that people like Judith Butler should ever have put their hands on. Ever. It's also something that people have for a long time forgotten. What makes it so exquisite to have people that are just different in the world? Eugene Ionescu said this, that the supreme trick of mass insanity is that it persuades you that the only abnormal person is the one who refuses to join in the madness of others, the one who tries vainly to resist. We will never understand totalitarianism if we do not understand that people rarely have the strength to be uncommon. So let me riff here a bit more. Let's go all the way back. In Torah, one of the stories that always troubled me the most was known as the Binding of Isaac. It's the story in which you see Abraham and Sarah finally having a child of her own. After everything she went through, after everything that happened with Hagar, all of this, and these are incredible stories. And then suddenly, what happens? God says to Abraham, sacrifice your son to me. And then says like, oh, just kidding. But meanwhile, in that little interim, Sarah dies. I've heard most people insist that she died of shock. I'd argue that makes no sense. If we died of shock that easily, we'd never give birth. I say she died of shame. Why? What is shame for a woman? What is shame for a woman? It's different than for a man. Or the feminine version of it. Because we all have in us a bit of the feminine, a bit of the masculine. We are man and woman, we contain them both, just like a language like English that has so many pronouns gendered, it gets confusing. Like Hungarian has no gendered pronouns. So we're not always playing these Hegelian dialectic he, she's, he, she's. Right? So if we have an I and thou kind of mindset, so I and thou both contain within ourselves the masculine and the feminine. When it's used and understood artfully, it expresses itself in different ways. And this is what theater, including drag, showed us. So a great drag performer, somebody like Charles Pierce, what was he doing? He was reminding these words, legends, goddesses. all of this. This was not about the way it's done now, where it's this performative, self-indulgent, frankly, sacrifice ritual. And here's a key point. In art history, nobody likes to talk about this, but one of the core truths about theater, which, by the way, art is useless. It's useless. And it's through that uselessness that something incredible emerges. Much like love, technically, is useless. Me sitting here sharing this with you is useless. Authenticity is useless. When everything is turned into a utility, you return back to a time in human history in which human beings basically could be convinced that in order to have it rain, or in order to deal with climate change, or in order to make up for something, or deal with global warming, whatever, anything, that we owe a debt, some debt to the gods. We saw this at the flower wars with the Aztecs. We hear it now with carbon zero. There is a pattern throughout history that does this, and this is the archetype of Amalek and the archetype of Moloch. It's archetypes. Just like in horror movies, you have archetypes. See, if you keep looking through the lens of the literal, rather than understanding what metaphor actually is, metaphor is a means of communication. It's communicating concepts and ideas in ways that cannot be done literally. And the longer we spend time in the literal, the longer we spend time with this, the longer we spend time so focused on one mode of thinking rather than bridging the two, we end up fractured. Why is someone gay? Those kind of questions only come. This feels very feminine in a way. It reminds me of what mean girls do to each other. Look, I don't mean to say this in a way that's crude or gossipy, but when you've got two wounded men having this conversation and laughing in that way that's not sincere, I think it gives you some information. And I won't allow myself to simply turn people into a spectacle like that. This is Me Too all over again. Why is someone gay? It's none of your damn business. It's not, why am I a poet? Why do I love men? Why don't I love women like that? It's not up to me. This is where God comes in. Now, what do we do with it? What is considered sinful? So we go all the way back again. What does Leviticus say? It says, what does it say? You don't hurt something performatively, and you don't do that to a woman. You do not lie with a man as you would with a woman. Why? Because it's cruel. It's relational. Another one is, here's another one. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Saying no killers? No. If somebody is different, somebody who seems to be magical, don't torture them. Don't torture the people who are truly extraordinary and different. It's not the same thing as sorcery. Because in the magic of the ordinary, I mean, how do we define magic? So all of this stuff now is really going back to some core questions. Why is someone gay? Let's talk about that original word. Why did they choose that word, gay? Because let me ask you this. What does a man's capacity to love another man, truly love them, tell us about the capacity for love, period? It's not to say that everybody should be, it has nothing to do with coming or your orgasm or pleasure. This is what is so pathetic about all of this. It's pathetic. And it's an old, old wound. And it began with socialist realism. It began art under Stalin, where he just adopted, and all these artists created a system of perception. And every single critical theory is rooted in it. I'll share a foreword for you by Alexander Sidorov, USSR Academy of Arts. Stalin's art through Soviet eyes. Now notice, look at this. What do you see here? What's happening here? See, in Russia at the time, one thing people have to understand is that Russian Orthodoxy, there is a real terror of God, similar to a sense of this old wound of debt to the gods that lead to the flower wars and a willingness to sacrifice a family member, a child, or even oneself because you believe it's for the greater good. By the way, I'll tell you, I'm proof. Since I couldn't get the vaccine, anybody who got it thinking that it was for the greater good because helping people like me never is. It's not true. I was still excluded everywhere. So this lie keeps going on and on and on, and it's rooted in this very issue. So here, Stalin's art through Soviet eyes. When you are in the latrine, you get used to the smell, whether you want to or not. Pushkin. Once an art critic has decided to write an objective history of Soviet art from the 1930s to the 1950s, he will find difficulties waiting for him similar to those confronting him were he to undertake to describe the artistic culture of Atlantis. Despite the extensive evidence recorded in numerous works, some of them consisting of many volumes, such as the 9-volume art history of the peoples of the USSR, the researcher not only comes up against a mass of quite different assessments from the very same artistic works and phenomena, but finds himself face to face with an iceberg, only 1/10 of which is accessible to view. And even that, only with difficulty. As regards the works of art themselves, monuments to the Stalinist era, what the art historian sees is not so much a forest, but rather a neglected piece of woodland where, instead of tall trees, the predominant feature is small tree stumps. Historian does not see a luxuriant head of hair, but rather a monk's tonsure. It is scarcely less sad to behold the golden fund of socialist realist art in its undamaged state than it is to look at the Soviet avant-garde. Since Khrushchev denounced Stalin in 1956, many of its masterpieces have been destroyed or have lain hidden and neglected in the depositories of museums and the Ministry of Culture. Nothing inspires the imagination as much as an absence of facts. This observation by the Russian writer Saltykov Shardin beautifully illustrates the process by which the art critic becomes aware of Stalinist art, beginning with the thaw under Khrushchev and continuing right up to the present. This process is marked by a series of pitfalls. Some of these arise when the attempt is made to assess aesthetically the creative work of the artist and to divide the artist into righteous people and sinners. Not one of the criteria employed when carrying out this separation can be acknowledged as being sufficiently reliable and irreproachable. One such criterion, however, much it appears to be the simplest and most indisputable of them, is the answer to the question, did or did not any artist, in fact, depict Stalin? As if, at that time, and under the circumstances then prevailing, the creation of an image of Lenin and other well-known personalities took on a basically different and unofficial character. Certain discoveries made in the era of perestroika are related to this false premise. An example is the picture called Opening Ceremony of the Second Comintern Congress by Isaac Brodsky, a well-known pioneer of official art. This picture is considered to belong to the category of outstanding clandestine works, the reason being merely that its painter, apart from Ivanovich Lenin, also depicted G. Zinoviev and A. Rykov and N. Bukharin and Radek and Kuhn and Platon and other distinguished people who were involved in the October Revolution and in the international workers' movement and who died in Stalin's prison camps. and was able to capture the characteristic feature of the future leader of nations, namely the haughty, scornful gaze and the caustic smile hiding in the mustache. Pravda, April 20th, 1989. The modern process of reevaluating history in the USSR does not, as a rule, admit even as much as the possibility of thinking of Stalin as someone who continued the cause of Lenin. The process is characterized by going to another extreme, that of an almost complete break between the Stalin and pre-Stalin periods. In fact, certain events which took place in the first years after the revolution, the breaking up of the Constituent Assembly, the execution of the Romanov Tsar's family and of Nikolai Gumilev, the taking of hostages in areas where there were peasants' uprisings, and the creation of the first concentration camps for political prisoners, including Solovka, ought under no circumstance to be reckoned among the category of exceptions which became the rule of the era of Stalinism. The idea of political management was formulated very clearly and definitely in the works of Lenin, which are known from selections of literature and are devotedly included in the collection titled V.I. Lenin on Literature and Art. To the present day, this idea, art's subversiveness to politics, is included as a provision of primary significance in almost all the regulations which are still valid today, in 1990, of those of the USSR's artistically and scientifically creative associations and institutions which were set up before 1983. Many artists, especially leading members of the Soviet intelligentsia, contributed in no small degree to ensuring the complete vassalage of culture. The battle between artistic groupings in the 1920s was a squabble to obtain a monopoly in the determination and pursuit of cultural policy. This was typical of the dictatorship of left-wingers and the People's Commissariat for Education. The squabble tended to develop into an intrigue to obtain leading roles and top positions in the state's horn of plenty. After all, that horn was fairly meager in those years. In the initial stage of its development, the system by which the party and the state administered the arts was only able to grow a tree of proletarian culture. In the main, it was enthusiasts, the communist futurists, the members of the proletarian culture, and the left-wing front and other left-wingers. By the way, as I was reading this, for some reason I saw Groypers right there, because it sure does look like it. Such as the so-called productionists and the life builders, who, by their own wish, climbed into this tree and watered and decorated it. In time, according to the measure of maturity achieved, a more powerful tree was successfully grown. The tree of socialist realism, whose trunk became the voluntary or compulsory testing ground for all artists, recalling the well-known scene in which the minister at court are tested in one of Gulliver's Travels in the novel by Jonathan Swift. There is scarcely any point in this short foreword in attempting to determine what socialist realism actually was. Whether it was a totalitarian method used by a totalitarian culture as a practical way of managing the arts, so that art was transformed into the handmaiden of the state and party bureaucracy, a style fixed within certain limits of society and time, an artistic or pseudo-artistic phenomenon, or a terminological fiction. It is more important to point out that in the Stalinist era, and the period thereafter, there was a system consisting of certain fundamental characteristics of artistic awareness. Perhaps most important of all, from a present-day Soviet perspective, the respected public had ceased to be an effective force and a participant enjoying equal rights in the artistic process. This was because, according to the vulgarized sociological opinion which had become established ever since the first years of Soviet power, the personal possession of objects of spiritual value came under the category of bourgeois lyrics. relics. Man, and especially simple Soviet man, was thought of exclusively as a viewer, but by no means a consumer or possible possessor of decorative artworks. And at best, he had to be content with a mere reproduction, copy, or album of an artist's works. This circumstance is indissolubly linked to the following 4 processes. First, public awareness was transformed into an object of demagogic manipulation and speculations. Secondly, aesthetic requirements were depersonalized, and the interests of the individual were completely dissolved in ideological and artistic programs imposed by the state. Thirdly, leaders appeared who acted as mediators of culture and invariably took up a position above the viewer, reader, or listener, and knew better than others what to teach, how to educate, what the people must know, and what they must not know, what the people needed, and what was contrary to their needs, what was good, and what was bad. And fourthly, art criticism was reduced to a concrete exposition of ideas sent down from on high. It played the role of a priest of a new belief who explained the postulates of that belief to the parishioners of the Church of Socialist Realism. See, when civic spirit is replaced entirely with party spirit, and when you've got queer theory emerging now, as Nick Fuentes, who is performatively telling you that he loves Stalin, and Tucker performatively accepts this, much like Václav Havel's greengrocer. The why no longer matters. The men are just performing. Milo is performing. None of it's true. My hope is that some people look, when we are now dealing with critical trauma theory and with somebody fabricating covert narcissism, that's a fabrication. Created by a guy, the man who created The Malignant Narcissist by that book, he's a con artist. When the inmates or the insane are running the asylum, art always functioned, and artists, much like scientists, had one shared goal and purpose. When this truth is discovered, reveal it, shine a light on it, but not fabricate it. That light, you can't create it. It's channeled. Only God creates light. But when we waste it, it doesn't vanish, it turns into darkness. And so, please hear me here. Yes, there was a period of time where certain questions weren't allowed. I hope to God we are coming to a balance that needs to happen. But queer theory is still queer theory. It doesn't matter if it's wearing a cloak of red or blue. And critical theory is still critical theory. And the Hegelian dialectic has no place in this conversation. This is not thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's a dance. What we're seeing now feels so Gnostic to me, it's absurd. There are no, look, when we think we have answers, when we think we're just asking questions, there's no such thing as just asking a question. There's no such thing as stupid questions, but there's no such thing as just asking a question. Especially when the reply to that question is, I don't know you. Anyway, So why are you gay? Maybe it's as simple as sometimes blessings are sweeter than curses. What is it? The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. And when that became political, the state loves nobody. You cannot love the state. What is the state? The state doesn't even make sense. It doesn't exist. It's a concept. And take it from, sharing your experiences doesn't make you broken or permanently traumatized. That's critical trauma theory. Ask any soldier who has PTSD. It's done in private. We've become so afraid of each other's wounds. It's become like a new virus. Because what's being passed along isn't real. It's a cultural prion, performative. And everybody's picking up the habit. Why are you gay? Or why are you not gay? Not everything is a problem to be solved. Because you know what happens then? We're back in eugenics land. And that's a real bastardization of heredity. Because it's in the unknown, and that who the hell knows why. Like even Mendel couldn't figure out or determine what color or the shape of fruit flies. What Mendel, the monk, saw was something that he allowed it to remain unnamed. We need to stop trending towards Stalinist futurism. Because there's no such thing as transhumanism. Why? Because we're the constant. Math is liturgy, art is equation, and relation and memory are the constant. The radical, the root, the radical defines them. You are essential. So why are you gay? Because you are essential. What does it say when somebody says God made you that way? I don't know what that means, because it's one of the reasons for us we don't have an image or a name for God. There's so many names. I will be what I will be. So that's personal, but once therapists and doctors try to give, that's ugly stuff right there. We know what that is. Thou shalt not suffer the uncommon, the strange, the weird to live. It doesn't mean burn them. It's quite the opposite. That's a nice little inversion there, isn't it? And that means go back to the source. Learn it. Because if the first line is wrong, in a beginning, not in the beginning, what else is? And there's more richness there. That's not to destroy anything. Because that takes us back to the original sacrifice theater where they would, rip apart Osiris and Dionysus, and they'd use a human being as the simulacra. So let's not do that. So instead of socialist realism or soak realism, how about we soak realism? Soak the stuff in reality. Soak it like water. Or pour oil like the Tin Man. I had a heart all along. And art and science aren't separate things. Just stop thinking everything is debate. Do you? And the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. Make the blessing sweeter than the curse. Hope this made sense. So why are you gay? The why doesn't really matter as much as what kind of gay man are you going to be? Or if you can change who you love, it doesn't make much sense to me. It's not about who you fuck. It's about who do you love. Right? So let's get it out of the freaking political world again. And let's not make everything about chaos versus order. Because that's not American, that's not human, that's not artful, that's not free, that's not liberty. Because what liberty really is freedom with restraints. The corpus callosum, engaged. It's when you hold back. It's when you suddenly see things clearer. I mean, not everything's a problem to be solved. Why are you gay? Remember the root of the word gay. Why are you happy? Let's not turn joy into another dancing nurse, okay? Please. And love into more dancing nurses. Because I don't know about you, I've had it. Why are you gay? What are you gay? It's funny. Because we've already had this answered so many times. Why are you gay? Why do I have a preference for pickles? It's a preference. And it's an aligned soul. It doesn't mean to thine own self be true. See? That's where everything went wrong. Language is sacred infrastructure, and the play is the thing. So go back and stop looking for the cabals and the mystery and just, if something is, a rabbi once said to me not too long ago, a lie is evil, but a lie that reveals the truth is good. So why are you gay? Just go out and love. Just go out and love. If you're gay, go out and love another person. Queer theory destroys that. Because it makes it so that nothing is queer. And the reason queer was such an insult is, again, gay men and women love men and women. Queer men and women never learned how to love. But it's not too late. So we can get rid of those weird sisters that manipulate things. And we can bring back a little bit of that sacred. Ladies, that's our domain. Make it light. May you be light and gay. And remember, the goddess Mnemosyne, she's the mother of the muses. And Cleo's a woman, according to the muses. So there is no herstory if Cleo's already feminine. There's only Cleo. There's no right or wrong side to her, because that's a little bit like a gangbang. Ciao for now.